Welcome to the Public Voice Salon. We are an open dialogue on education, the arts, and social change. And today we're broadcasting from NYU, actually a very special place for me. This is the program where I got my master's degree in English education in the mid-1990s. And during that time, Mr. Mark Alter was in charge of the program, and he still very much is in charge. This is one of the great programs in our country for education. And we're going to get deep into why that is and why education matters more than ever, in particular into the health of the democracy. We are, I think, one of the few shows that are really focusing, Mark, on that, on a link between education and democracy, as John Dewey talked about. And I really stumbled into this program. Know how cutting edge it was. I had no idea that I was going to be learning about Paulo Freire. I had no idea who Louise Rosenblatt was. It was one of the founders of the English Ed program here. And people like Gordon Pradl, his book Literature for Democracy, which is one of my favorite books. I go back to it again and again. Even though I'm sitting in John Mayher's chair, I found out, the great John Mayher, who was also my professor of education and linguistics, and his great book Uncommon Sense is canonical for me as well. So many great intellectual heroes of mine have come out of this program, and my hope is that one day they'll be more famous or more well-known than Kim Kardashian, because I think we have a problem in our country now. We have a problem with fame for the sake of fame. We see who the president is, Donald Trump, and there's questions about the health of our democracy, and we're going to get into that connection between democracy and education with Mark Alter here at NYU, and we want this just to be a beginning, Mark. We'd love you to come back and have other colleagues around and really get deep into this discussion of why education matters now more than ever before. So with that, I'll let you introduce yourself. And here he is, the one and only Dr. Mark Alter at NYU.
Thank you for that introduction. Just want to modify one of the statements. Okay. I'm in charge of just me, and that's enough. Okay. But a little history, yes, I think, puts who we are and where we're going and what we believe.
Hear, sweetie, is the microphone close enough? Okay.
In perspective. So in 1990, the Department of Teaching and Learning was formed. 14 different programs, such as English education, math, social studies, science, special education, which was in the Department of Applied Psychology, all came together to form one department called Teaching and Learning. And I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity to chair that department. And it was a lot of fun. And the reason it was a lot of fun is because we came together and we asked some critical questions. And the question we asked is, what is a teacher? What does it mean to be a teacher? What is knowledge? What's worth learning? How do you teach? My background is in psychology, my background is in special ed, so I thought if you ask general education, they would have all the answers. Well, every program you ask and every individual I asked, everybody had a different answer. And the key is there a common ground? Is there a way in which to build a department? Is there a way in which to recognize the differences yet make a commitment to a certain direction? And the beauty was that the answer is yes. And what we all agree to is that a critical person in a kid's life is a teacher. And while we may not fully understand how to do it or do it well, what we did come to agree on is that being in the field, student teaching is important. And more than just student teaching, exposure to the city. We agreed that kids come to school, and kids come with a lot of strengths, a lot of weaknesses, such as poverty. Kids with disabilities. There are over 400 languages and dialects spoken in the city. What a great, 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 great sense of diversity. And as a department, what we did is we saw the diversity not as a weakness, but we saw the diversity as a strength. And I think that approach, certainly led by John's work on common sense, certainly led by the work of Gordon, Marilyn Solomon, and inquiries into teaching and learning and the beginning courses. So we always felt that it was a work in progress. And so master educators, my perspective was I was lucky enough to be the steward of the department as opposed to a chair of a department. And I was lucky enough to have a faculty that were willing to challenge everything. And that, to me, is the heart and soul of being a teacher. So if you would say to me, and I said it to my class tonight, that when they go out looking for a job, they should look for a school that allows them to say, I don't know. So I don't know of, and I think there are good programs in this country. I think there's some outstanding programs in this city. Have to comply with regulations, with accreditation, but then our students leave us and they go into something called a school. And what is the climate of the school? What is the culture of the school? Does the school allow them to be the teacher that will enable this kid to acquire the skills, the knowledge needed to be a citizen in our society? And so that's a lot more than standardized tests. It's a lot more than any defined protocol. It's how do you get this kid to be a learner from pre-K all the way through high school, and if they want to go to college, hopefully it carries through to college. So when the department formed, it formed with this agenda. And the agenda didn't change, but what did change are courses, the curriculum, what we look for evidence. So, and I think that's the heart and soul to who we were, and certainly I think we continue that challenge to change, because I don't think anybody got it right.
Still trying.
We're still trying it. It's not an exact science.
Okay.
I think there are a lot of unanswered questions. How much student teaching do you need in order to be adequately prepared to be a teacher? How many methods courses do you need to take in order to know the content of the material? How diverse should your courses be in cultural responsivity? There are 13 different categories of disabilities. Do you need courses in each disability? And we have the restraints of reality, which is it costs money. So we have 4 years undergraduate. Graduate work is only tends to be 14 months. But it's a limited amount of time, a limited amount of courses. What are the magic bullets that will prepare someone to leave a teacher ed program and walk into a school and be ready the first day? And I don't think we can do that unless the school has an infrastructure that supports teaching and learning.
Just reflecting on how life-changing this program was for me, how it empowered me to find my voice. I was very shy before I came to this program, and then I'll never forget, getting into a circle in John Mayher's class and working in small groups and things like that, and realizing that I had something to say, that knowledge is socially constructed. The sense of honesty, the sense of trust that was built in these classes was just phenomenal. And then to be able to go out into the world and to create these liberating environments in other schools was so incredible and exhilarating and emancipatory. However, you bump up into administration that it doesn't always follow along that liberating way, let's just say. And John Mayher prepared me for that too. He said, somebody's got to be careful. You got to go under the radar, be careful, and you may be in a hostile territory where they don't care about these modern methods, these liberating methods. They don't care about John Dewey and this kind of work, and you have to go very careful. So my first book on teaching was called Teaching Under the Radar, Confessions of a Secret Agent of Change, because that's what I find you have to do, unfortunately. And then I actually decided I wanted to change that title because I don't want to be under the radar. And I changed the title to Teacher as Liberator, because I think teachers have also, that is the thing that we do. We liberate. We create democracy in the classroom, and that democracy permeates out into the society. That's what Thomas Jefferson said we should do. That's what John Dewey was about. My question to you, Mark, is why we have this kind of suffering in our society, this loss of democracy, this inequality of wealth, all of these political issues, that if we had a fully functioning school system, that people were learning to think critically, and they know who to vote for, A or B, and they know when they're being lied to by their leaders. Do you think that there's a connection between that, between education and democracy? That's really what we want to go deep into with our show.
Oh, wow. That's a tough one, and it's a loaded question. I think one of the places I would start is by using the definition of a sound basic education as defined by New York State. Okay. And I think it's critical, and I'll explain to you why I think it's critical. Sound basic education in the state of New York is available to all kids in the state of New York to acquire the foundational skills needed for competitive employment, civic engagement, and community integration. So that's New York State. And every state has its own definition of sound basic education. Now, the question is, are kids graduating, leaving the New York City schools and New York State schools, having received a sound basic education? Is it enough to have Common Core? Is it enough to have is standardized tests actually measuring the substance of the Common Core? And I think what you find is that kids are not getting enough of an education. So the question is, are they getting those foundational skills? Are they getting social emotional skills, self-esteem? Are they getting critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills? Are they getting exposed to how to think and behave creatively? What I think is what makes a democracy is the opportunity to exercise creativity, problem-solving, decision-making, autonomy, independence without consequence. So I think that we do have a democracy. I think the opportunity to think that way is here, to vote for whomever you want, to do things, that freedom is here. The question is, have the kids received the foundational skills that allow them to take advantage of all the rights that have been granted? So clearly, I don't think we have enough kids who have critical reading skills. I don't think we have enough kids that have been given the opportunity to learn how to be decision makers. And what happens is that I think those skills start in pre-K. So again, this is a bias, but it's beyond my belief how, as a country, we don't invest a substantial amount of money and resources into early childhood education, because the consequences of early childhood education is that you have more kids getting employed, more kids stay in school, fewer kids go to prison. So the payoffs are enormous. So I just think it shouldn't even be a discussion item, but yet we're still discussing early childhood education. But the skills of problem-solving, decision-making, creativity, play, sharing, empathy, all these skills that may go into making a citizen start in early childhood and continue all the way through high school. So when I go into a school and you ask, interesting, what's the purpose of high school? And if they say, well, passing the Regents, you know you're in trouble. Yes. So I think the key is, so you know, when you said what you got when you came here, and that was the brilliance to the English ed faculty, many of the faculty, but John, Gordon, Harold in Maryland, the brilliance is that, they gave their belief, and it was the foundation a lot of certainly what I didn't believe in the department, was it gave the students a voice. Now that's interesting because a voice is more than words. A voice is emotions. A voice is self-esteem. And I would say, John, how do we get that voice? How do we get our teachers to enable early kids in childhood, kids in elementary, kids who are bilingual, ESL kids, kids with disabilities? How do we get them to have that voice and exercise that voice? And our schools doing it.
Yes.
See, that's the challenge.
Yes.
And I'm not sure we're there yet.
Well, we're getting there. We're trying to get there, and that's why we're doing this show, because I look at the media, I watch corporate shows, news shows, Rachel Maddow, all these shows that tell you what's going on in the world, and when they get to education, they don't seem to go deeper into a substantive discussion and debate. So we're trying to pick up the slack of that, with our show. So we're so glad that you decided to come on tonight, Mark. It was an extraordinary program, life-changing in many ways, and that's one reason why I got so frustrated going out into the world. And, schools that I taught at were very mechanical, very teach to the tests. And I said, wait a minute, but I learned this great stuff at NYU. Forget what you learned at NYU. We don't care about what you learned. But it was a great program. We don't care. And so most of the time I was able to be successful, Mark, by going against my administrators. I mean, it sounds bizarre. The boss says do this and you do something completely different, okay? Well, that's the case when you're working for a dysfunctional school. And I taught at 3 high schools in New York. I was the rescue mission teacher. I came in after the regular teacher quit, fled, ran out the building, okay? In one case, he had a nervous breakdown up in Harlem, and I replaced him after 3 days. And I was successful to the extent that I defied my administrators, except for the 3rd school. The 3rd school was interesting. It was called Cascades, and it was in the Lower East Side. It was actually in Chinatown, and it was run by 3 men. One of them, Jason Blonstein, who actually works here at NYU, was a new teacher mentor, wonderful man, beautiful guy, and Tommy Cheng, who got his doctorate from this program. So when I went to that school, they were using these methods like, I would say to Jason, what should I teach? He'd say, go to your bookshelf at home. See what you're interested in. You can only make what come alive, what you're interested in. And too many schools, they don't give any choices. It's a lockdown type of thing. We teach to the tests, and textbook companies are getting rich. And that is the crisis that we face. I taught in a community college in Newark, and for many years I could get away with not using a textbook until about a year ago, and then you got to do it this way or you're out, and blah, blah, blah. So we see this show as an educational institution. Welcome, Mark, to this program. You're Professor Mark to the world now, okay? Feel free to invite your colleagues on, and unless Rachel Maddow calls you in and says, come on in and talk to the country about education, I would hope that would happen one day. I don't know why it doesn't happen. These are the
if my kids watch it.
People who think. These are the real thinkers, So what could be done, Mark? We in this educational crisis. Bill Gates at one time was very active with his New Visions School, which I thought was very good, actually, And if you could talk to these big guys with money that they could come in and be helpful, what would you say to them? To a Mark Zuckerberg who gave $100 million to Newark, where do the resources need to go?
John, boy, I think they did too good a job of getting your voice, expressing yourself.
It's all your fault, Mark. Gordon Pradl and John Mayher.
I think that I wouldn't condemn all public school education in all schools, but what I would say is that, 2 things. One is, the biggest problem that I would see, if you would say to me, what is the biggest initiative that this city has to do, and probably major other urban areas, is reduce class size. Okay. So if there would be a silver bullet, and I'll give an example. Being a high school educator, you have 30 kids on register. You have 5 sections a day. That's 150 kids. Mm-hmm. Since you were trained at NYU, you know how to foster creativity in writing. Mm-hmm. You give an assignment, and now your 150 kids write 3 pages each. That's 150 times 3. That's 450 pages, single-spaced. When are you supposed to read it? When are you supposed to then meet with individual kids?
Exactly.
When are you supposed to give them feedback on the substance, on grammar, and sit down and give them recognition for their work? It's impossible to do. We take a teacher in elementary school, we put 30 kids in a classroom, up to 14 can have individualized education plans, IEPs, and now we say to this teacher, differentiate in 45 minutes. We don't give the teacher enough time to plan. There's not enough time to sit back and reflect on the work that they've done. So we have an infrastructure, regardless of who the principal is. And now we say to this principal, we're going to hold you accountable. And by the way, I believe in accountability. I just don't believe in using the standardized tests as the basis for accountability. My sense of accountability would be looking at the teacher learning process and looking at things such as lesson plans, delivery of those lesson plans, a whole bunch of other things. Now, your second part of your question, what would I say to a major benefactor who's going to give or would give money? My response was invest in the families. And here's what I would have proposed if I was sitting with Mr. Zuckerberg. I would have said, yeah, put $100 million into Newark, but here's how I would allocate the money. All the research shows that it's important to have parent involvement. What I would do is I would say create incentives for parents. Pay for them to come to the school to learn literacy skills or learn how to teach literacy skills. Pay the parents transportation. Pay for babysitting. Perhaps provide meals. And then what I would say to Mr. Zuckerberg, if the kid's scores rise as a function of their involvement in the school, then give the parents $15,000, $20,000 at the end of the year. So I would take all that money and I would put the money into families and not put it into the school.
Wow.
So part of it I would reduce class size. That's given.
Okay.
So I would say reduce class size, and then I would do as much as possible to incentivize the involvement of parents in the schools, but make it real. Cover transportation costs, cover babysitting costs, provide meals if needed, and provide an incentive that if your child shows certain growth, regardless of how you're going to measure it, that you can get a substantial amount of money and get parents involved in the education of their kids.
Oh, wow. What's fascinating, Mark, what you just did is you took the dialogue in a whole different direction, unexpected, which is what a good dialogue is, which was a good. And I realized that I need to calm down. So, Claudia, I want you to show that cup there because I need to follow the advice on that cup. It says, keep calm and keep believing. Keep calm and keep believing. And then if that doesn't work, we have some alcohol here. We have some shots we could do, okay? That's the thing. But anyway, what's interesting, Mark, about what you just did was you talked about like how teaching and learning happens not just in a school, but it happens everywhere. It happens in the community. It's part of the politics of a whole society. It has to be looked at. When I taught in Newark, I would often think, gee, if they had more bookstores, local bookstores that students could be exposed to, they would get the literacy in a more engaging way, a more interesting way.
We can use using Newark as an example, and I'm familiar, especially with the special ed component to Newark. We can blame poverty. We can blame a whole bunch of things. It's at this point, poverty is not episodic. You're not going to press a button; it's going to disappear. But it doesn't mean we can't work within the constraints and what poverty represents. At the same time, working on it. Poverty doesn't belong just to a school. It's a community. It's quality of life. And it's all that a youngster and a family brings to one social institution called a school. I don't think we've been responsive enough to looking at education beyond the school. So that I see it, I'm a grandparent and I love it, and I see the language that my kids use with the grandkids, the level of language, the frequency, the explanation. It doesn't mean my kids love their kids any more than anybody else, but they have the repertoire, they have the script, they have the language that will enable them to do homework, to expand vocabulary. So why not provide those skills to everybody? So Mr. Zuckerberg, if you give $100 million, incentivize the family, give the supports that are needed that will enable those people in the community to participate as the more affluent and better educated people are able to. And it's not that hard to do. Provide transportation, provide a hot meal, provide the training, provide the reinforcer, go online, set up computers at home, have ongoing education, so that the school is not a microcosm of education, but becomes part of a community of education. And we're very far from this.
Wow. Think about also the content of curriculum and how we're sort of moving into this STEM focus, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Obviously, we need to have these things, but do you think we're giving short shrift to the humanities, to literature, to philosophy, to history and art?
Yes, but I think we need to do it all. But we can't do it within the current structure of our schools in terms of length of day, length of year. But there are other ways in which to do this, through informal science, so that if you look at the richness to New York City, it's its informal network, it's the museums, it's the Bronx Zoo, it's the Botanical Gardens, Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, it's the libraries. It's the children's museums. One of the great children's museums is up on 84th Street. And the key is, how do you integrate? See, and this is the beauty to teaching and learning. If you look beyond the classroom, if you look beyond the school, how do you build in the humanities, not just in the school, but how do you build in the breadth and depth of a culture beyond the school? So right now, as long as schools stay structured the way they are, large classrooms, very defined day, that it has to happen outside. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of kids who are going to be walking away without music, without art, without appreciation, without exposure. I think some of what's happening, and I think this is one of the great advantages to technology, that through Google Earth, and many of the museums in the city have online programs that needs to be built into the curriculum, and that's the richness of the teaching process. I just hope that teachers have enough time, enough supports with technology people that will enable them to be creative with the curriculum. You asked a curriculum question, which is a loaded question. I was a curriculum developer for a number of years at Yeshiva University, and it's very easy to write a lesson plan curriculum sitting in my office because you don't have kids. And you can build in all the theory in the world. You can build in Dewey, you can build in Vygotsky, you can do Piaget. Teacher stands in front of a group of kids. There's no way that teacher is going to be looking, and the master teacher is spontaneous. The master teacher is able to respond to the diversity in the classroom. And the master teacher is not going to follow a scripted curriculum. But you want that teacher to be able to be flexible. And in order to be flexible, they need to have a body of knowledge. And that's what we're supposed to do. If we do a good job, and I think we do an okay job, I think certainly there's room. If the teacher goes to a school that doesn't have the infrastructure to support it, then you have a dissonance, you have a clash. And it's how do you resolve that clash? And that's part of being a teacher.
Yes. I have a big problem also with teacher growth, or I think it should be focused on that a teacher needs to feel happy and needs to feel good about themselves and their lives. And I think teachers are being so overworked today. And I'll just give my own situation, that after teaching in these troubled high schools and having that experience, I decided to shift over to teaching college as an adjunct professor, which is very low pay and extremely like poverty wages. You got to teach 5 classes just to survive and that kind of thing. Luckily, I was able to get into a housing situation in Hoboken that's public housing, pretty good quality, but still my rent goes up and down based on my income. So unlike my colleagues, I could maybe teach less classes, right, and have time to read and write and nurture myself. And now I have a lovely wife who allows me, she works full time, has the day job, and I can teach less and do more meaningful things and read and write. And I've written 15 books, all because I've had help. I have a family that, if God forbid I can't pay the rent, could help out. But out there, it's rough. It's really rough for adjunct professors. And I think the public needs to know that 85% of the professoriate now in our country is adjunct professors, precariat labor, underpaid, don't have time to think, don't have time to write and do research that would make them a competent teacher.
Yes.
What do we do about it?
I think when you look at the universities, I think one of the critical pieces to this is to understand that someone who has an adjunct position is a smart, qualified educator. It doesn't mean that they're any less than anybody who has a tenure track position. I think it's, how do you involve an adjunct, a tenure track faculty member, a clinical faculty, in the culture of the institution? And in a way, it's the same structure, the same issues that we have in schools. How do you have a paraprofessional, you have a teacher, how do you engage? You have team teaching. So I think the issues you're raising are systemic. The lowest paid professional in education in this country is the early childhood teacher across the country. I think average salary is approximately under $30,000. So here's somebody working with the most fragile group of individuals, someone who's starting out kids on a path, and they're the most underpaid. If we look at teacher salaries, it's outrageous. I had a discussion. I don't know if I should say this. I'll say it. I had a discussion with my daughter. My daughter is an emergency room doctor.
Okay.
In a very tough, up in the South Bronx, tough place.
Okay.
And here was our discussion. It was great. I said it's more difficult to be a teacher than to be an emergency room doctor. I love my daughter, so we had this. So I said it's not even an argument. Well, her response was that she deals with life and death. I said, not every case.
Right. Okay.
Well, that certainly. So I said, I certainly don't understand what you do, but let me give you my lens. Okay. I said, my lens is, you're up in a hospital. Someone comes in stabbed, gunshot, overdose. You have residents. You have nurses. You're never alone. If you need radiology, neurology, you call up. You get consults, that there is a support. Yes, you are the primary decision maker, but you're making those decisions within the context of a support system. So now let me make the teacher argument. Okay, teacher, I'll take early child to child, doesn't make any difference. That teacher's by themselves. So you take an elementary school teacher there for 45 minutes, an hour, with 30 kids, with enormous variability. All third graders are not the same. There are 30 individuals with different backgrounds, different demographics. There are over 400 languages and dialects spoken in the city of New York. There's about a 77% poverty rate in the city, so the ravages of poverty are in the city. 1 out of 5 kids in New York City have an IEP, have a disability.
Oh boy.
Teachers by themselves. No one to talk to. I don't know how to teach this. I don't know how to teach this. I'm having a problem with the class. It could be behavior. How do I bring down, a kid is in the 4th grade reading at the 2nd grade level. How do I bring down that reading level, which I can do if I have the time to do it? That teacher is by themselves. 5 days a week from 8 in the morning to 3 o'clock. They're basically in isolation in order to do their primary task of teaching. So I said, yeah, I'm not taking away from your job. And you get better paid than the teacher, by the way, which didn't make her happy. But the point was, there is no other profession that has this responsibility to deal with such variability at a specific point in time. Wow. And there's no way any teacher ed program can put together the coursework that will respond to the diversity, so that you can say we're going to teach about kids who speak Spanish, for example. Well, you have kids who come from South America, you have kids who come from Puerto Rico. It's a different Spanish, different culture. All of Asia, Mandarin, Cantonese. The diversity is a strength. How do we prepare 13 categories of disabilities? You have learning disabilities, you have within learning disabilities, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia. You have intellectual disabilities, you have different levels of intellectual disability, you have autism, different. And you say to a teacher, you got everybody in your class, and throw in a couple of gifted kids. And you say to this teacher, educate all these kids at the same time in 45 minutes. So your questions are critical. But I think, again, going back to the beginning, I think the part of the magic bullet, reduce class size significantly and create an infrastructure for teaching and learning in every school.
You know, I realize the hour goes by so quickly, and as we get into it, I want to make sure I also give a shout out to some other great people in this program, like Paula Ressler, who was my student-teacher mentor over at City As School in 1997, and to Harold Vine, who was the director of the English Ed program when I first came in. I never forget, he stood by the door of the classroom and smiled at each of us as we walked in. I had never seen anybody do this. Was absolutely blew my mind. He wanted to have an encounter with each person as we walked in, an existential encounter, just a smile as we walked into the room. Harold Vine, beautiful man. And Marilyn Sobelman, of course, also. And then I want to give a shout out to one of my classmates, okay, Maya Soreto Nig, who is the half-sister of Barack Obama, who I didn't realize that at the time, but I knew there was something remarkable about her when she was in class, and she spoke one day so eloquently, and I said, boy, she's so amazing. I think there's big things ahead for this woman. You know, she's so incredible. I only found out recently she is Obama's half-sister, and she runs a peace program out in Hawaii, and we reconnected, and she invited me to one of her peace seminars in a church on the Upper West Side. Wonderful conference on peace we had. She's doing incredible work in the world. This program trains leaders. It has a chemistry to it that's wonderful, and I think it needs to really, we owe it to you as well, Mark, because you've been nurturing this program all these years and been here. Let's shift it over to you now, personally, in terms of your Bildungsroman. This has become one of my favorite words. Since I read Goethe, The Apprenticeship of Wilhelm Meister, this idea of an intellectual biography and how you developed into the teacher, the learner, the thinker you are today, thinking about family experiences growing up, in school and out of school. What made you who you are? And who are some of the teachers and some of the moments and maybe some of the books you've read and that shaped your intellect?
Wow.
Yeah.
John, my
big one.
God, my wife. That's really a tough question.
Yes.
Let me start by saying I probably have the greatest job in the world.
Okay, yes.
Okay? That I'm a tenured full professor, and my full responsibility is to think. I get to think, to write, to research, and the freedom to behave that way is what I believe all teachers should have, all people should have, but it's unique to be able to go to a class. I just had a class before our meeting today, and it was phenomenal. I mean, I had a great time with the students, and they engaged, they talked, they read, and the high that you get from that interaction. But I think part of it is goes back a long, long time, and I'm not sure I understand it fully. I think about it. So my background is working with kids with severe and profound disabilities. So I was always a camp counselor. I liked, I enjoyed that. And then when I left college, I needed a job. I come back to New York, and someone said, have you thought about working with kids with disabilities? It was then called the mentally retarded. I said, no, it never crossed my mind. And they sent me to the Association for the Help Retarded Children up in the Bronx. And these people who would have ended up in Willowbrook, the state institution. That's how severely involved. Non-ambulatory, didn't walk, they couldn't feed themselves, totally dependent. And to me, I started out as a paraprofessional. I did toilet training. I'm a great toilet trainer, except for my own children. I don't. Whoa! No, I call for help. But and teaching kids to eat and do all these types of things. And I've been asked many times, why do you work with kids, or why is that primary group? If you believe, and I do, that all people can learn, if you believe that all people have the right to learn, then it's an exciting, intrinsic exercise and battle to figure out how to do it. So take the kids who violate everything we know about human growth and development, and work with OTs and PTs and speech therapists and guidance counselors and parents, and you get magic. That kid is now doing something. So I'm then fortunate enough to be offered a position here at NYU in 1980. I come here, I'm in the department, and I walk into an environment that just reinforces that behavior. 1990, I was asked that the new department was formed. Great Dean Ann Marcus comes in, and she says to me, build a department. Wow. Wow. And then I have faculty like the Gordons, the Ken Goldbergs. I have these incredible people who are thinkers, who are committed to education, and sit down and you build. Now, to me, I thought it would be easy. So I think it's tough working with a kid with cerebral palsy, with multiple disabilities, a kid who may have Down syndrome, youngsters who are blind. That, to me, is tough stuff. They can learn, but that stuff, me, give a kid who's intact, should be no problem. Reading, writing, what the kid there's nothing. There are no barriers, and if there are barriers, lower the barriers. Well, I struggle until today, struggling with why aren't we doing a better job educating kids who don't have disabilities. Of course, with disabilities, it's more difficult, but if a kid is intact, if a kid is coming to school and the kid is not hungry, this kid is sitting there, why are these kids not doing better? And I think because I'm not sure if we've made the changes that we need to make in the system. See, I'm not convinced it's all money.
Okay.
I'm not convinced.
Right.
If we have room for co-location in schools, then we have room and had room to reduce class size. Why didn't we do it? The space was there in the schools. Why didn't we reduce class size over these years? And it's not a pedagogical reason. It's not rocket science that more kids you have, the less time you have to individualize. It's not rocket. Why didn't we reduce class size?
So the problem, as you say, and as John Mayher says in his book also, Uncommon Sense, that it's a political problem. How is it possible to create a political movement that really values teachers and these issues? Is the Democratic Party, how would you grade the Democrats versus Republicans in terms of this issue?
I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, because I don't think. See, we will in a democracy, we will always have politics, and we will always have different views, and I'm not sure any one party has the solution. I think that the solution is a societal solution. Until this country makes a decision and a commitment that all kids, regardless of who they are, will receive the best that we can offer, the best that we have, the best of the resources, then it's not going to be any party that's going to do it. I'm not sure that we as a society have made a commitment to educate all our kids. So if you look at all the textbooks in here, you look at all the journals, there's no question kids can learn. We have research that clearly shows we have different reading programs. Every single reading program shows kids can learn. We have math programs, kids learn. Which one you choose is up to the expertise of the teacher and of the school. But for some reason, we're not pressing all the buttons to ensure that every kid gets all the resources. I'm not sure we're pressing all the buttons to ensure that teachers are getting all the support. Schools need to be better staffed. They need social workers. They need guidance counselors.
Oh, yes.
The school is in loco parentis.
Yes, right.
And I'm not sure, I am sure, that schools are understaffed in meeting all the needs. I don't think schools are universally accessible for all kids. So we're getting better, but only certain schools are accessible. So if I go into a middle school or a high school, I would expect to go into the labs and see a cutout so that they're wheelchair accessible. I would expect to see elevators in schools. We're not there yet. The mandates are there. The policy is there. I would have liked the president in the speech the other night to speak more about education. So I agree. I think there needs to be more vocational education. But that's not the solution. I would have liked to see resources put into early childhood education. I would have liked to see resources put into more development of curricula, teacher salaries, teacher recruitment, teacher retention. I mean, you can make a litany. I think the future, our future as a country, I think the future of every country is dependent on its educational system. The more inclusive the school system, the more inclusive the society. The more accepting the school system, the more accepting the school system, the society is going to be. So the school should be a model of the culture.
I've often been frustrated in certain faculty rooms, where I'll bring up a particular thinker, let's say, an educational thinker, let's say John Mayher. I'll say, boy, I had this great professor at NYU, blah, blah, blah. And they look at me like I'm a snob or something, or I know these things, or I'm uppity, or I talk about Paulo Freire or John Dewey. There's a dumbing down, even in the faculty rooms. And so who do you think, Mark, are the most important educational thinkers or philosophers whose work is not being paid attention to enough in our society, in our school system, that we could learn from the work of some great thinkers, who's some of the thinkers who've shaped your growth as an educational person?
John, boy, I wish you had given me a list of these questions before. Universities have been accused of not bridging theory and practice. So if I would say, for example, we need to do more Vygotsky. And we do more Vygotsky, because everybody does scaffolding, or at least that's what we teach. That's not where the issue. There are tons of people from all the way to theory, from Dewey. I would go more into psychology. I would look at some of the psychologists. But I think the issue is when a teacher gets into a school and stands in front of a bunch of kids, I don't think there's any one theory or one theoretician that's going to resolve or make teaching any easier. So what a theory does, or a theorist is going to do, is going to give a basis of organization and organizing information. So if a school says we're going to be an open school, we're going to take a Deweyan approach to the school says this is going to be our culture. No matter what theories you take, that's going to be. It's up then to the administration to be able to implement the principles and the practices that support that theory. That's where things start to break down. It's very hard, for example, to find a pure Montessorian school. It's very hard. Not that they don't exist. They do exist, but it's hard. It's hard to find a pure school. I think, well, let me backtrack. I don't know of any one theorist I would say would be the guiding principle for anything. But what I would say is that the people that have shaped how I think and what I do have been individuals. So ranging from Herb Goldstein I had for my master's and doctoral work to Wolf Wolfensberger, who very few people may have heard of, in Bent Nietzsche, in the concept of social role valorization and normalization. So I think there are individuals that shaped what I think and what I believe, and the opportunity to discuss ideas. So I think teaching and learning is an interaction. And what's happened in schools is that it's not an interaction. It tends to be where the teacher tells the kids.
Right.
And the idea that a kid receives information and then will process that information, understand that information, and then give it back when. See, and that's where standardized tests tend to limit. So how do we change the teaching and learning process into an interaction, into an opportunity for a kid to say, you know what, I don't understand. Class of 30, it's hard to do that. Kid to say, I like that. Can you talk a little more about it? That exchange, see, and that's what you were explaining. What you had here was a freedom of expression. And it was enhanced, it was supported. But it was how the department was structured. And I would probably say that that same approach was seen in almost all our programs. At one time, we had 14 different programs, special ed, early childhood maths. We had 14 programs that made up this department. We had close to 1,200 students. We had a lot of undergraduates, a lot of graduates. And I would say what made the department successful was the commitment by the faculty to make it a very student-centered environment, from undergraduate right through doctoral. And I believe, and I certainly the faculty believe, how do you get schools, public schools, to have that same type of a model?
Now, Claudia just gave us the 5-minute sign, 6 minutes, okay, 6 precious minutes we have with Dr. Mark Alter here at NYU, and I hope this is just the beginning, Mark. I hope you'll come back again, one-on-one, and also with other people, and recommend other people to have a larger discourse, interdisciplinary discourse here. I feel blessed to have caught the tail end of this kind of utopian program, this English Ed program with John Mayher and Gordon Pradl and these wonderful people, and the way it was run, the way you organized it and structured it. But I'm wondering now if there were not outside forces in politics that sort of shaped that and made that go away or diminished that. Did it have to do with the 1960s, with the radicalism, with the experiments, with people like Herb Kohl and Freire, and maybe when Reagan came in, and then gradually those hopes were diminished, and education became more lockstep and more corporate and more sterile. You think that's part of it?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think it was a perfect storm, and so we're coming out of the Vietnam War. The politics were different, the culture, my generation, but I think there is no one factor. So if I look now, the change is not because the theorists have disappeared. The testing is not because we have questions about testing. I think part of what's happened, we're at an era now where we want to be more careful. We're looking for evidence. We're looking for justification. What we're saying is that the schools have not done a good job. Let's look at technology. It's so advanced. The schools of education, you put out a lot of teachers, but for some reason, kids are not learning. Now, I disagree with that argument, but I think that we say schools haven't been working. We need to change the schools. So I think we're not at the end of a process. I think we're in the process of change. I think that we're being held accountable and should be. And that's where all the testing is coming from. It's an age of accountability, and we haven't come up with, not that we don't know how to do it, of a more efficient and effective, cost-effective way to hold us accountable. So in the last couple of minutes, if you would ask me what I would recommend happen, I believe accountability should be for teaching and learning as a process. I believe that schools and teachers ought to go in and have some protocols, and that schools should be evaluating instruction, and teachers should be looked at in terms of instruction, not the product of what a kid learns as much as what has been done to teach this kid. I think that should be school-based. I think because of the variability in schools and in classrooms, I think principals and assistant principals should be involved in evaluating their whole school. I think all this information, I think parents should be able to come into schools and go into classrooms and share in the evaluation of teachers. I think it should be radical. And I'm not sure we're there yet.
Right.
But I think if we're going to say to a school, we're going to hold you accountable, and we're only going to use one measure, standardized test, which may not reflect the school, we're not going to get to a healthier point of view. So my generation, we were at that healthier point. We were looking at the gestalt. We were looking at interaction between families and kids, kids and schools, kids and kids. We were dealing with empathy, social learning, curriculum. There was a freedom of thought, but we were never held accountable for it. But there was more of a freedom of innovation.
I feel so happy right now to be sitting in John Mayher's chair, talking to Mark Alter. Many times that I spoke with John in the office, one-on-one conversations that were very helpful, and with Gordon. So this program emphasized one-on-one conversation, real deep dialogue and honesty and discourse, and it has an integrity to it, and I could see why, because you are the man in charge now, or still here now. Just let's say, in terms of education and democracy, if Thomas Jefferson and John Dewey were looking down now at America in terms of schools, what would they grade? How would they grade the schools in terms of education and democracy? And if there are problems, you think we could fix our schools in time for the 2020 election, so that the voters going in will say they know who to vote for? I know it's tough.
I think if they're looking down on us, I think they'd be very happy that the democracy has worked.
Okay.
Yes. I think the failure can be fixed relatively easily if we want to make the change. So I think if they look down, they'll say there's freedom of choice of schools, there's more freedom of choice than ever before. I think the charter school movement is a perfect example of choice and its creation. I think there will always be bumps in the road. So I think we have choice. I think they would be a little disappointed. I think they would like to see more integration. I think they would have liked to see more of a level playing field for all people. I don't think it's a level playing field for everyone. I think they would say the 2020 election, let's lay out an agenda based on certain principles. I think they would say, how do you open things up, make them more open? I think they would argue for democracy that we have a greater discussion. I'm not sure they would put the focus of change just on the politicians.
So we ended actually on a note of optimism and hope with Professor Mark Alter here. And
educators are optimists.
That's right. And we hope that if Mark Zuckerberg gets to watch this, maybe everybody could share this on Facebook multiple times. Share until it gets to Mark Zuckerberg, and he's invited to come and join us here at NYU for the next conversation, or anybody else, politicians or people who want to change our educational system and make it better. With Mark Alter, will be a wonderful choice for Secretary of Education. We have had a pleasure being with you on Washington Square. Thank you so much. I'm glad that Claudia got to meet you as well, my darling wife Claudia, who's filming us. And if it wasn't for her love, this show would not exist. So love is important and education is important. Thank you so much, Mark, for being on our show.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.